Cases are indeed beginning to grow, with the myth of Africa evading COVID-19 now officially dispelled. And as a region, we brace for the pandemic. Learning lessons from other countries will certainly be vital. Let's chat to Daniel Kavishe. He's African economist then at Rand Merchant Bank as we discuss this just a little bit more. Daniel, thank you so much for the time. I know you've been waiting for quite some time, of course, listening to the minister a little bit earlier on. So we do thank you for the time. Africa does brace itself then, doesn't it, for what could be a really, really difficult one, considering how the virus could certainly go into the less fortunate areas.
I think you're absolutely right. One of the things we looked at already sometime in February was we were concerned about the structure of most of the African economies. They're relying on sectors which I think often at times directly do not seem to contribute that much to your traditional GDP matrices, but are integral. I think one of them being a segment like transport. And traditionally, we have captured this basically only looking at the hospitality sector. But if you realize across the African continent, it encompasses way more than that. There are several linkages within this sector. And because of that, as the spread of the disease started to spread, we could notice less traffic coming into Africa. And the problem of that is that whilst this sector remains relatively small in the way in which we compute it using our traditional economic indicators, a lot of people are employed in it. And a lot of governments have had to contend with the fact that they now have to support a lot of these wage laborers, and forgive me, who are either out of employment right now or are struggling to maintain their businesses. Same can be said for other segments where we've got a lot of laborers participating in transport, as an example, which is the backbone of a lot of our African economies in any case. It is the linkage between sectors of construction and, if you think about it, to distribution, to retail. And so, again, several people who are based in these sectors are now having to contend with the fact that they have to stay at home. And unless you are operating in non-essential services, this then impacts you. This has been broad-based. You're right. I think the way in which we've approached it has probably not been the best as a continent. I think we've had to learn, from what has been experienced in other countries, but I think the realization of how quickly some of the cases have started to increase across the continent in different parts is telling us several things about how quickly then we have to fortify not only fiscal and monetary policy to support both segments of the economy which cannot generally support themselves, but then also to ensure that there is a coordinated response which is being called from some of our bigger global leaders.
Daniel, do you think then, you speak about trying to coordinate the fiscal and monetary portion of all of this. Can Africa survive, though, considering we aren't the most fiscal or monetary policy-wise rich? Yes, resource-wise, that's a different story. But in this case, we unfortunately need to fight this fire with a totally different kind of fire. Do we have the firepower?
So I think the concern in the African continent, at least lost most of the economies, is that given the fact that over years we've had to go through significant structural reforms, a lot of countries haven't been able to build up sufficient buffers to prevent them from such a massive external shock. Monetary policy and fiscal policy have been loosened. I think that should go without saying. And I think we applaud a lot of our leaders who are trying their utmost best to ensure that we can at least support the economy the best that they can given this season. But most importantly, in a few months' time, which is the belief and hope that we have, whilst we can start scaling back into work, there is that impetus to support a lot of businesses, households, and governments as they edge into this growth. But right now, you're absolutely right. It is a strong vulnerability for the continent. And I think that goes without saying. I think you've clearly heard most of the other presidents speak across the different parts of the world with the show we've had right now, with the news of how prime ministers, presidents are being very tactful in their approach, stating that, look, the reality is there's only so much that they can inject within their economies. They do need support of multilateral partners. And I do think it is coming. And I think that's a big positive. We have seen a lot of private businesses. We've seen a lot of commercial entities. We've seen a lot of solidarity across the world standing together to fight COVID-19. And I think this will in effect, in a few months' time, bring about a very different continent that we're looking at, a very different world where people realize just the true impact of globalization and what it's really meant for how it is we do business.
Yeah. What type of countries are the ones that will come out of this perhaps quicker? Certainly not unscathed, but a whole lot quicker. And what I mean by that is certainly just what would have needed to have been done in the process in order to get yourself sort of out of this mire as quickly as possible. It's not only the flattening of the health curve that we're trying to flatten here, but really the GDP in negative territory. We're trying to flatten that and get back into some sort of growth too here.
It's a difficult question, my friend, and it's a very hard one. Hindsight, I guess, is always the best teacher. And it's easy for me to stand here and say, look, if a lot of these countries had built up sufficient reserves, if we had made sure that our health services were top-notch, that could respond quite quickly to the outbreak, then we would be in a completely different case. But each African country within the continent is quite different. I think that's the first thing. But then also we've seen the impact that it's had on traditional markets across Europe, across different continents as well, that despite having or being known for having some of the best health facilities, having the most prudent fiscal and monetary measures, they're also feeling the brunt of this. So I don't think that it could have been just one lever. What most people are standing on, what a lot of people count for, is strong leadership and strong governance. Yeah. And I think that is what is pulling a lot of these countries together. That's what allowing people to feel that they're fighting and at least winning the fight against the disease. When they start seeing strong coordination and governance from their leaders pointing towards areas, they don't necessarily need to get it perfect, but at least they're stating something and they've been constantly communicating with their people. Yeah. I think that's what's garnering support right now within the continent.
Daniel Kavishe, thank you so much for the time. Really, really appreciated. An interesting conversation there, really around Africa, the growth projections. Where to from here? Certainly going to face a real tough one. African economist there from Rand Merchant Bank. That's Daniel Kavishe. Let's continue.